The Subcommittee on the Indo-Pacific of the Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to learn how we can better leverage U.S. businesses to advance our economic and national security goals in the Indo-Pacific. And I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Once again, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Welcome to the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee's hearing entitled Commerce as Statecraft, Better Leveraging U.S. Business to Advance Our Economic and National Security Goals in the Indo-Pacific. To say that the Indo-Pacific region is economically important to the United States is an understatement. The Indo-Pacific region is the largest market in the world for U.S. exports. This region supports over 3 million U.S. jobs and $900 billion in foreign investment in the United States. And it is home to 60% of the world's population and a top contributor to global economic growth. In my home state of California, 20% of our exports go to the Indo-Pacific, totaling over $25 billion. The Indo-Pacific is a top U.S. market and vital to the strength of the United States economy. Yet, despite this importance, the U.S. government has failed to economically engage in the Indo-Pacific in a sustained and substantive way. We have no comprehensive multilateral trade deals in the Indo-Pacific and only a few free trade agreements with countries in the region. This can lock out U.S. exporters and investors from many dynamic economies and does nothing to level the playing field against highly subsidized goods from Chinese Communist Party. This CCP uses its dominant export position to pressure and coerce our friends and allies. You know, just in the last year or so, I have traveled to 9 Asian countries, and in every country we visited, I hear the same thing, that the United States is the partner of choice, but without substantial economic incentives, countries will be forced to accept trade and investment with political strings attached by the CCP. We were disappointed to hear that the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework did not include market access or tariff reductions. I consider IPEF as a potential first step toward a more comprehensive economic agenda, but it was certainly not enough. And now that the Biden administration has decided not to sign the trade pillar, it is even less of a useful framework. Furthermore, partners in the region are reeling from the administration's announcement of a moratorium on all new natural gas exports to non-FTA countries. Despite being an advocate for free trade, I am aware of the dynamics around the trade policy. It will take both congressional and White House leadership to inform Americans on how increasing free trade in the Indo-Pacific will benefit our small businesses, families, and national security. Yet even without active free trade negotiations, we can do so much more in the region economically. First, we must be serious about pursuing sectoral agreements in the Indo-Pacific. We know semiconductors and critical minerals are components that will be key for our technological advancement, and we know that countries in the Indo-Pacific have the capability and resources for both. We cannot let this opportunity go to waste. We must start negotiations for critical minerals agreements and semiconductor supply chain agreements. And we should be using these negotiations to raise those standards in certain countries while deriving tangible mutual benefits from those agreements. Second, we need commercial diplomats that fight on behalf of the United States companies. State and commerce should be seeking legal and regulatory changes in these markets and advocating for U.S. companies to win businesses. The Foreign Commercial Service and Economic Cone of the State Department's Foreign Service officers should be actively finding trade and investment opportunities and helping U.S. companies seize them. Lastly, we have to be serious about setting the standards and frameworks for digital economy and digital trade. Southeast Asia's digital economy alone is worth $1 trillion. And I have heard from multiple countries that further digitization will bring even more growth. The US must lead in the standards and set frameworks for good digital economy practices, or we'll risk losing this ground to CCP. Given these priorities, I would like to hear from our witnesses what lines of efforts that you are taking to increase US experts in the region and provide legal and regulatory certainty for investments in the region, including through free trade agreements. And so I want to thank all of our witnesses for your willingness to testify today, and I look forward to a detailed discussion about our US government efforts in that regard. I now recognize our ranking member, Ami Bera.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. As the Chairwoman stated, the Indo-Pacific is the most dynamic region in the world. You see rising economies in Southeast Asia, vibrant young economies in their own right. You see established economies in Japan, Korea going from one of the poorest countries in the world 40 years ago to this robust, dynamic economy, and now you see the impact they're having in our social cultural norms with Hollywood Watch Out, I guess. So it's an exciting time, and if I could take my magic wand and roll us back to 2016 and past TPP, that would be great. We're not there, and that's not this day and age, but there's still lots of opportunity, and I applaud the Biden administration for some of their initiatives to recognize the importance of the Indo-Pacific and strengthen that. One of the cornerstones is the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, the APEC Forum. And at that initiative, at the leaders meeting, the administration adopted, many measures, including announcing over $50 billion of investments from U.S. companies into APEC economies to support clean energy transition, shore up reliable supply chains, bolster regional and cyber preparedness, and support small and medium-sized businesses. I think those types of initiatives are ones that are smart, that help U.S. companies, and are things that we should be doing. Chairwoman mentioned IPEF. I know lots of the pillars are still being negotiated, but we had a chance to meet with Secretary Raimondo a few weeks ago, and in that conference, some of the pillars that she has are moving along fairly quickly, and in fact, some of those chapters have been signed. So it's what we have. Let's build off of that foundation and continue to do what we can. And I would second what the chairwoman said. I think digital trade is something that we have to get right and build a foundation. Short of that being signed, I would urge Congress to address issues of digital privacy and that, which are nonpartisan issues that I think that would make it easier for us to advance digital trade efforts. And then the third one, and this, in many ways, this subcommittee hearing is building off of the full committee hearing that we had this morning. And in that meeting, Undersecretary Fernandez talked about the minerals security partnership, which I also think doesn't get talked about much, but is incredibly important. In terms of the MSP is a grouping of 14 countries. And the European Union, including some of our closest partners, Australia, Japan, Korea, India. And really, this is an initiative, and when we get into the questioning, certainly turn to our witnesses to talk a little bit about it. But there's, we'll compete with Japan, we'll compete with Korea in battery technology, manufacturing of cars, and so forth. But an area of real cooperation is the critical minerals and everything else that will go into that battery technology. These are places where I think partnership and collaboration in a strategic way, whether that's going into Mongolia, going into African nations, et cetera, to build new markets to the benefit of those countries, really gives us a strategic advantage, allows us to build redundant supply chains, and allows us in a very different way than the PRC or others to build economies in this region and create stability. So I think more of the efforts, and again, I'll want to hear more about the MSP and some of the examples of where this is already working. So with that, let me go ahead and yield back to the chairwoman. And again, I thank the witnesses for being here.
Thank you. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. And we are today pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses on this very important topic. First, Mr. Kin Moy is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the United States State Department. Thank you for joining us. The Honorable Matt Murray is the Ambassador and the U.S. Senior Official for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation at the U.S. State Department. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Pamela Phan is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Asia at the U.S. Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here, and your full statements will be made part of the record, and I will ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. So let me now first recognize Mr. Kin Moy for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bera, thank you for the invitation to appear today before this subcommittee. I'm pleased to join DAS Phan and Ambassador Murray to discuss the administration's efforts to advance U.S. economic and commercial interests in the Indo-Pacific. The United States remains a major economic partner in the Indo-Pacific. U.S. companies are the top source of FDI, foreign direct investment, in the region, with nearly $1 trillion in U.S. investments, and roughly the same amount invested in the United States from the region. The United States also remains a major trade partner with more than $2 trillion in two-way trade. Exports to the region and investments from the Indo-Pacific support almost 4 million U.S. jobs. In the past 3 years, we've seen $200 billion in new investments announced from the Indo-Pacific, including $17 billion by South Korea's Samsung for a semiconductor plant in Texas, and $4 billion by Japan's Panasonic Energy for a battery production facility in DeSoto, Kansas, which will create 4,000 jobs. LG Chemical announced plans to invest $3.2 billion in a plant to manufacture EV battery materials in Clarksville, Tennessee, creating more than 850 jobs. CS Wind, the South Korea-based wind turbine tower manufacturer, broke ground on an over $200 million expansion to its Pueblo, Colorado wind tower manufacturing facility, which created another 800 jobs. These are just a few of the examples of the tangible benefits of active engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. The administration's Indo-Pacific strategy's objective to drive Indo-Pacific prosperity states clearly that the prosperity of everyday Americans is linked to the Indo-Pacific. Since the strategy's release in 2022, we are just celebrating the 2-year anniversary of its release, we've advanced key administration approaches to advance economic prosperity, including the launch of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. You just noted that, Chairwoman Kim and Ranking Member Bera, which Deputy Assistant Secretary Phan will discuss in greater detail. Engagement in APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, which Ambassador Murray will discuss in some detail. Efforts to advance high labor environmental standards, work with partners to advance resilient and secure supply chains, a commitment to close the region's infrastructure gap, and an emphasis on standing shoulder to shoulder with our like-minded allies and partners in the region to enhance economic and trade opportunities and counter coercion. Before providing more details on progress over the last 2 years, I want to make 2 important points here. First, we know it's critically important to support U.S. businesses and coordinate closely with the private sector. American firms create good-paying jobs at home, encourage innovation, strengthen economic competitiveness, and expand opportunities for middle-class families. Given the vital role that U.S. businesses play in the region, the State Department is working with the Commerce Department, the Trade and Development Agency, and other U.S. government partners to co-host the 6th Indo-Pacific Business Forum, otherwise known as IPBF, with the Philippines in Manila on May 21st. In Tokyo, in 2023, the IPBF convened more than 1,000 business leaders and senior policymakers, highlighted about $11 billion in new investments, and launched roughly $100 million in new U.S. economic initiatives. We look forward to similar outcomes this year in Manila. Second, we share the subcommittee's concerns regarding the PRC's economic influence and unfair practices in the region and remain focused on strategic competition with China. The administration's approach to China aims to invest our strengths here at home, align our efforts with our allies and partners, and compete with China to defend our interests. This requires a lattice work of economic engagement mechanisms to ensure we are simultaneously competing with the PRC and enhancing our ties with like-minded allies and partners. I won't go through the laundry list of other economic and commercial goals we have for the sake of time. But I want to conclude by just emphasizing 3 points. Number 1, the Indo-Pacific region is central to our future. Number 2, this future is not just about security, but also about economics and trade and investment. And number 3, it is incumbent on us to solidify and sustain this engagement and make it real for the long run. And just in conclusion, we'd be happy to answer your questions on everything that we are very proud of, from our work on Taiwan to 2+2 with Japan, 2+2 economic, ministerial, and digital connectivity, as you just raised. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moy. I now recognize Ambassador Murray for your opening statement.
Well, Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bera, members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the invitation to be here to discuss the administration's efforts to engage the Indo-Pacific region through the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, or APEC for short. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute alongside Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Moy and Deputy Assistant Secretary Phan to highlight our partnership with the U.S. business community and other stakeholders as we expand U.S. leadership in the region through APEC. The APEC region remains central to the economic future of the United States. APEC's 21 member economies account for more than 60% of global GDP and nearly half of global trade, including 7 of our top 10 trading partners. U.S. exports to the APEC region top $1.3 trillion, and companies from APEC economies have invested more than $1.7 trillion in the United States. Our exports to this region support nearly 7 million jobs in the United States, and many of these jobs are at amazing women-owned businesses like Chucker Cherries, based in Prosser, Washington. When we hosted APEC meetings in Seattle last year, I met with Pam Montgomery, the firm's founder and CEO, and Pam told me that her firm was heavily tapped into the Asia-Pacific with partners across the region and was open for business. APEC continues to be an incubator for innovative solutions to economic challenges. Once a forum concentrated mostly on trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, APEC also is now uniquely positioned to advance economic and trade policies that contribute to advancing sustainable and inclusive economic growth. In 2023, the United States hosted APEC for a 3rd time and used the opportunity to lead on multilateral economic cooperation, enhance engagement with partners, uphold international rules and norms, deliver substantive outcomes on economic sustainability, resilience, and inclusion, and strengthen public-private collaboration. Under the U.S. APEC host year theme of creating a resilient and sustainable future for all, the United States deepened its commitment to drive inclusive economic growth for the benefit of American workers, families, and businesses while delivering prosperity across the region. The United States also is proud of launching the first APEC Women in the Economy Forum during our 2011 U.S. APEC host year, and we continue to work hard to ensure all our communities have an equal opportunity to participate fully in the Indo-Pacific's dynamic economy. On the policy side, our APEC agenda amplifies U.S. private sector strengths, supporting sustainability through just energy transitions, promoting digital connectivity and developing digital skills, and reinforcing resilience through secure supply chains are all areas where U.S. firms have a competitive advantage. We've worked to demonstrate that active private sector engagement is the secret sauce of APEC's success. U.S. companies can contribute directly to APEC process through the National Center for APEC and the U.S. APEC Business Coalition. We've focused intensely on the important contributions made by small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, to APEC member economies. And I had the privilege of hearing directly from many SME owners and entrepreneurs across the country through our stakeholder engagement efforts. And we ensured U.S. SMEs could participate in the APEC CEO Summit and other public-private events throughout our host year. During APEC Leaders Week last November, the administration highlighted $50 billion of new U.S. private sector investments into APEC economies and $200 billion of new private sector investments from the Asia Pacific into the United States, as Ranking Member Bera just noted, all of which support high-quality jobs in the United States and the APEC region. The important policy outcomes leaders endorsed through the Golden Gate Declaration when they met last November demonstrate how APEC benefits the American people regarding integrating inclusivity and sustainability into trade and investment, a just energy transition, achieving food security through sustainable agri-food systems, and disaster risk reduction, among many other focal points. We also advance meaningful outcomes in the ministerial level, including in areas as diverse as cloud computing, anti-corruption, and worker training. As this year's APEC host, Peru has committed to moving forward many of the U.S. priorities we successfully advanced last year. APEC is key to the Indo-Pacific Strategy's economic prosperity pillar, including as an effective international grouping that includes Taiwan as a full member. But as today's hearing demonstrates, it is by no means the only initiative we are carrying forward in the administration. Our engagement in APEC is complementary to efforts of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the Quad, ASEAN, and other regional and bilateral mechanisms. We remain committed to strong collaboration with our private sector partners to ensure that APEC continues to provide these opportunities. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Murray. I now recognize Ms. Phan for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bera, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today, alongside Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Moy and Ambassador Murray, to discuss U.S. government efforts to leverage our economic tools to advance our economic and national security interests in the Indo-Pacific. As the most dynamic and fastest growing region on the globe, the Indo-Pacific is a leading U.S. foreign policy priority for the Biden-Harris administration. We are working to firmly anchor the United States in the Indo-Pacific and to strengthen the region, along with our closest allies and partners in the region. The Department of Commerce is proud to play a key role in the administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, which envisions an Indo-Pacific that is open, connected, prosperous, resilient, and secure. And to achieve these goals, Commerce's International Trade Administration, or ITA, is embracing an affirmative agenda that seeks to protect U.S. interests and values, champion U.S. workers and businesses in markets worldwide, attract foreign investment here to the United States, and bring high-paying jobs to communities across America, all while maintaining the United States as a global leader. ITA is uniquely positioned to be one of the U.S. government's most effective resources for helping U.S. companies compete and win in the Indo-Pacific and the global economy. Over the last 5 years alone, ITA has facilitated an estimated $183.5 billion in U.S. exports to countries in the Indo-Pacific, supporting nearly 812,000 American jobs. Our day-to-day commercial diplomacy efforts in the region, which are made possible by our Foreign Commercial Service on the ground, are bolstered by engagement from senior officials in the department. Just last week, I joined Secretary Raimondo as she led a group of American executives on a presidential trade and investment mission to the Philippines to strengthen our commercial ties and business-to-business relationships there. In Thailand, she led members of the President's Export Council to help identify opportunities for the United States and Thailand to grow our bilateral commercial relationship. We continue to invest in our long-standing relationships in the region, not only bilaterally, but also multilaterally through the frameworks that have been discussed, APEC and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, IPEF. As the cornerstone of the administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, IPEF is a platform for the United States to strengthen our economic engagement and our leadership in the region while advancing an economic agenda for long-term cooperation with a group of 13 like-minded partners. Commerce has led the negotiations on 3 of the 4 pillars under IPEF related to supply chains, the clean economy, and the fair economy, while the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative has led the negotiations on the trade pillar. Our IPEF partners have welcomed the U.S. engagement, and all 13 of our other partners have participated in the negotiations for the commerce-led pillars. The supply chain agreement was signed in November, and it entered into force in late February. We and our partners also announced the substantial conclusion of negotiations for the Clean Economy Agreement and the Fair Economy Agreement in November, and we anticipate signing these agreements in the coming months. These outcomes send a clear message that IPEF partners are committed to making our economies the best destinations for trade and investment in the region through upholding transparency, predictability, and the rule of law. Proud as we are of all this work, additional resources are very much welcome to continue growing commercial ties and deepening bilateral government engagement to meet the U.S. economic and national security needs of the future. Acknowledging the importance of ITA's role, the President's budget for fiscal year 2025 requests $645.5 million for ITA to increase U.S. export competitiveness and to counter unfair trade practices and economic coercion by malign actors at a time when we must show up and show up often if we are to help U.S. businesses compete in markets around the world, including in this region. The additional resources requested in the President's budget are imperative to ITA's ability to counter the PRC and to keep up with the demand from U.S. exporters for our services in the region. I look forward to working with this subcommittee to continue our delivery of the powerful tools for commercial diplomacy that we know can be the difference between success and failure for U.S. companies competing in markets in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'd be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Well, our partners have told us that they were, I'm going to start questioning, sorting myself, sorry about that. Our partners have told us that they were surprised when the United States pulled out of the trade pillar of the IPAF. That was at the very last minute at the APEC. Partners have informed us, actually, they didn't know until they arrived to attend APEC that the United States has decided to pull out. So, Ms. Phan and Mr. Moy, can you discuss why the United States decided not to sign the trade pillar of IPAF after informing our partners that we were ready to sign? And why this decision was not communicated to our allies and partners prior to the conference? Mr. Moy, you want to go first, or Ms. Phan?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the question, and I understand the concern there. These negotiations have been a challenge. They are ongoing for the trade pillar, in fact. There is an intent from the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, to continue conversations on these very complex issues throughout 2024. What I can say is that significant progress was made. We put a lot of effort in November on the margins of APEC into moving forward the other three pillars as much as we could. And in record time, in 18 months, we were able to not only sign the supply chain agreement, but also announce the substantial conclusion. Partners did express pleasure. They were there for the ministerial with us. The atmosphere was very upbeat, and those are the pillars that address some of the most sensitive, critical challenges of our time, including supply chain resilience and the clean energy transition.
Mr. Moy, as you respond to the same question, can you, you're both talking about that the administration is intending on restarting the negotiation of that trade pillar. Can you talk about if, when that happens, you're going to consult business stakeholders that express concern, especially concerning the digital protections?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. And yes, we will be consulting with American firms on this very important pillar. I would have to defer to USTR colleagues on the latest details of the trade pillar, but we are confident that in the long run we'll be able to succeed in this. We're really proud that this is a high standard and inclusive, free, and set of free and fair trade commitments that will help workers in the long run, consumers, and also businesses. So I think for the latest, obviously USTR colleagues can provide more on that, but we are confident that we will not only continue to move toward a resolution, but we are also going to be, as you suggest, consulting
Can
relevant Americans.
Can both of you talk about what tangible incentives does IPEP provide to our partners, particularly those in Southeast Asian countries that do not have bilateral trade relationships with?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm happy to get us started on that question. The three pillars that we were responsible for tackled supply chain resilience, the clean economy, and the fair economy. On the supply chain agreement, the partners have recognized that the pandemic and other disruptions from the past couple years have created choke points. That agreement now establishes three bodies that allow us to come together with the partners to address things that we were not able to 4 years ago. The Secretary often says if we had had the supply chain agreement in place during the pandemic, we may not have seen some of the disruptions, or we may have been able to address them in a better way. On the clean economy front, in fact, there is quite a bit in there that is designed to allow us to work together with our partners in the region, including in Southeast Asia, to help them towards the clean energy transition. And in fact, it has been announced that in June we will have a clean energy investor forum in Singapore in June. Our intent there is to encourage not only those partners to come to the table with projects and updates on the types of reforms that they may have in place.
I have an important question I wanted to ask, so I know I'm running out of time. So let me ask that right now to Ambassador Murray. In November, the United States chaired the APEC, as you know. The conference coincided with President Biden and Xi Jinping's summit on the sidelines, but some of the critics claim that that overshadowed APEC. So can you talk about whether or not it was beneficial for the Biden-Xi summit to overshadow meetings with regional partners and allies?
Thank you for the question. I think it was really important for the president to meet President Xi there, and the response that we had from many of our partners in APEC was that they saw it as a very positive part of Leaders Week, because for them, having good communication between the United States and China is critically important for the benefit of the region. And so what we looked at our APEC Economic Leaders Week opportunity, we saw obviously all of the policy objectives that I've outlined that we wanted to achieve. But as always has been the case, APEC also can serve as a platform for some of these very key bilateral discussions. And it was not just with President Xi, but also with the President of Mexico. The President of Indonesia visited Washington just before San Francisco. And so that was a very positive development as well, in addition to being a platform to help launch IPEF. So I think our partners responded very favorably to that.
Thank you. I know my time has gone over, so let me now recognize Ranking Member Bera for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And again, thank the witnesses for being here. It's good to see all of you again. As I mentioned in my opening statements, I think one of the key strategies and something that I did talk to Secretary Raimondo about is kind of in that supply chain resiliency, clean energy space, the MSP, the Mineral Security Partnership. And I think it does, given that partnership of 14 countries in areas that, build resiliency, and maybe Secretary Phan, you could talk to this or whoever's most appropriate. I think we've got some real tangible examples of where we've been able to work with countries like Japan, countries like Korea. There are projects in Asia, but it also allows us to go into Africa and other places, Mongolia, if whoever is most appropriate to talk about it. I don't think we hear about it enough here in Congress. Is that? Yeah.
Well, just to start, I think the administration has been laser focused on supply chain challenges for the entirety since February of 2021, when the president launched the America's Supply Chain Executive Order. And that executive order identified 4 key sectors, one of which was critical minerals. So I think ever since that time, the administration's been focused on different mechanisms to be able to collaborate with our partners and our allies on, key supply chains like the critical minerals supply chain, which is so important for our innovation and everything that we're doing, and obviously is also very related to our economic security because of the challenges posed by the People's Republic of China, their market share in that area. And so, Undersecretary Fernandez and others throughout the interagency have really been innovative, I think, in the way that they've approached other countries to come up with this partnership in which there's key information sharing, there's identifying gaps and other challenges that each of the partners have. And so that will be work that will continue. But I think the other important thing is that all of these supply chain conversations are now being embedded across so many different mechanisms, including, for example, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, because it is such a key area, key issue for all of our partners.
I would just add that ITA launched recently some strategic efforts in support of climate solutions. That was 2 years ago. Since then, we've recorded support for U.S. company involvement in more than $5.4 billion in climate solution projects abroad, and we've helped to attract $38.6 billion in climate-related FDI into the United States. 2 years ago, I actually led a clean energy trade mission to Vietnam and Indonesia. That was an opportunity to engage bilaterally with the relevant ministries to talk about their enabling environments, but also to bring our companies across a range of subsectors in the clean energy space to present their products and services. We have gotten some wins out of that trade mission. We continue to do trade missions of that nature. And just referring back to the trip that we took to the Philippines last week, there were a number of companies, including in the solar, nuclear, geothermal space, that were with us to pursue opportunities as well.
Secretary.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'll try to be brief here, even though I do have quite a few things to say. So just want to refer to the Inflation Reduction Act. So the IRA is the most significant climate legislation to date and the single largest investment in clean energy in U.S. history. It's expected to increase global clean energy investment by $36 billion per year for the next 10 years. And it puts the United States on track to achieve the president's really bold goals of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So again, I'll try to be brief here. I know I have limited time, but the IRA will provide investment tax credits to build clean technology facilities that manufacture wind turbine solar panels and batteries in America, attracting foreign investment and export new technologies. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from every sector of the economy by 1 gigaton annually by 2030, or just over 3% of current global annual emissions. And it will deliver more than 10 times the climate impact, or more than 10 times than any other piece of legislation in history. So I know that there are other countries we've spoken to about IRA. There were a lot of questions about this, but our diplomacy, our economic diplomacy, has put this in the forefront. We want to communicate with countries like South Korea, like Japan, about what this is and what it isn't. And I think that in the end, many countries see this as a benefit after we have fully explained what the IRA means.
Great. Good policy and good economic policy.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Representative Barr for his questioning.
Well, that last comment just provokes a response, because as I've traveled to the Indo-Pacific region, Mr. Moy, the pushback on IRA has been fierce. South Korea, the ASEAN countries, they see the IRA as discriminatory against them. So I don't know how that actually facilitates or propels our diplomacy forward. But I really want to focus more on the trade agreements. I want to get to IPEF in a minute, but let me first, Mr. Moy, ask you about the Taiwan trade efforts. In August of 2023, the U.S.-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade First Agreement Implementation Act was signed into law. As co-chair of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, I see this as a good first step to beginning formal trade negotiations with Taiwan. However, we must ensure that we, in fact, take that next step. What is the status on implementation of the first sets of agreements, the U.S.-Taiwan 21st Century Trade Initiative?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question, Congressman. A big fan of Taiwan. I'll try to be brief. I've got a lot on my mind when it comes to Taiwan because this is such a good story. So last year, we did sign the first agreement. It is not in force yet. What we are doing right now, that first agreement addresses trade facilitation, customs, other issues. And we are now doing an analysis or research on the impact it will have on the U.S. economy. And then after that, and we hope this will be very soon, we will provide that to Congress. And we look forward to having a conversation with Congress about those effects. We are also planning on further discussions on the U.S.-Taiwan 21st Century Trade Initiative. We want to talk about areas like labor, agriculture, other impacts that will help both our economies.
If I could reclaim and
Taiwan.
just
Yep.
cut to the chase here, what is preventing the administration and USTR from beginning formal free trade negotiations in Taiwan? What makes this so difficult?
Well, the 21st Century Trade Initiative is actually an agreement. It's actually a landmark agreement where we are able to take advantage of Taiwan's very open economy to have conversations where we will increase trade. I mean, we have been discussing these topics, as I noted. Trade facilitation is part of that discussion. It was part of the first agreement, as well as customs and other aspects of the economy. That's just a start. We have already begun those discussions, and we are in the middle. We've already signed the first agreement, and we will be providing our analysis soon to Congress. Yeah.
Well, I think you would have strong support in Congress for a free trade agreement with Taiwan. We have privately and in public with letters urged the administration to pursue trade promotion authority with Taiwan. Given that Taiwan is not a part of IPEF or any other regional economic trade agreement, ensuring that we reduce our barriers to trade with Taiwan will lead other countries to do the same. I will reiterate the question, what are the barriers to getting an FTA done with Taiwan? What are the impediments? What are the challenges?
Well,
And this is for any of our panelists.
Sure, I can turn to Ambassador Murray in a second for his thoughts on it, but I think for for clarification's sake, Taiwan or Chinese Taipei is a part of APEC and has been an active member.
I mean IPEF, though. In fact, when I was in Taipei, they were actually quite upset that they were excluded by the Biden administration in IPEF.
Right. I think at this point, again, I'll turn to Des Van in a moment and Ambassador Murray for thoughts on that. But at this juncture in the IPEF, I think the 14 members are actually focused on the current pillars. I don't think, you probably heard from the Undersecretary earlier today an answer to that question about IPEF and expansion and all that, but at this juncture, I think we are really focused on the current priorities.
Ms. Phan, can you tell me what you believe are the key impediments to a free trade agreement with Taiwan?
As Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Moy said, we did accomplish a lot in that first set of agreements. I think that the remaining issues are issues that it is taking some time to get through. I would have to defer to USTR on the specifics of the negotiations. That being said, we are doing a lot with Taiwan in general. That includes a framework that the Commerce Department has established specifically to facilitate trade and investment in 5 key sectors that are critically important in our bilateral relationship. They include semiconductors, clean energy, next generation telecommunications, renewable energy, as well as cybersecurity.
Well, my time has expired, but you have support on the Hill to get that done, and so does USTR. So we will work with you in any way possible. That economic integration is deterrence. Yield back.
Thank you. Let me now recognize my other California colleague, Congressman Bryce Sherman.
Any panel that is majority California members is a good panel. In addition to looking at trade, investment, particularly risk investment, is important. We encourage Americans to take risks through the capital gains allowance in our tax system. China has analogous provisions designed to encourage Chinese citizens to take the risks of investing in common stock. Mr. Moy, you talked about the tax provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. Does China provide its pro-investment subsidies or incentives to those Chinese citizens who invest in American stocks? Does anybody know? Okay. The answer is no. But we have a capital gains allowance and step up in basis upon death, which dramatically treats capital gains profits on stock at a much subsidized tax basis. Folks represent the administration. Can you think of any reason why we are subsidizing Americans to encourage them to invest in Chinese stocks? Is that consistent in any way with our trade or foreign policy? Mr. Moy?
I'm not aware.
Okay. Mr. Murray? Ms. Phan? Okay, so I'm hoping my colleagues will do what the administration should have done, what administration should have done 20 years ago, and that is join with me in legislation, which we introduced on a bipartisan basis yesterday, to say that when you invest in the stocks of companies based in China or Russia or Iran, that you do not get a capital gains allowance. Can I count on our panel to go back and get a State Department determination of where you stand on such legislation?
We'll certainly take that issue back, Mr. Congressman.
Okay. Another issue of fairness on the economic side is being brought up by TikTok. Mr. Moy or anyone else, are American companies allowed to make billions of dollars by owning TV channels in China or apps with millions of subscribers, providing them with interesting political content? Is that allowed?
I believe it is not allowed.
So just on a commercial basis, we should be banning TikTok, even if it didn't have the national security concerns. Otherwise, we end up in this asymmetrical situation where we give access to an important part of our market and they don't have access to theirs. I'll point out that free trade agreements are very popular with grad school educated people and members of Congress. They are incredibly unpopular with the American people. We should remember that in 2016, Trump was elected president, I think because he was against TPP. He was against TPP so effectively that he forced Hillary Clinton to announce she was against TPP, only nobody believed her, and she's good, and I love her, and I didn't believe her. We've talked about Taiwan. Taiwan ought to be included in the IPEF. Mr. Undersecretary, what's the current posture on the United States in including Taiwan in the IPEF? No.
Congressman, I'm happy to take that question. For the past 18 months, we have been focused on the 13 partners that started in with us on IPEF. We are just getting to the point where we concluded the supply chain agreement. We've substantially concluded the clean energy and the fair economy agreements, and there will be a process that is put in place to determine.
Can you be a little bit more welcoming than there will be a process? How about an invitation?
This is one of those issues that will have to be discussed with the other partners in IPEF.
If one of these other partners decides to blackball Taiwan for political reasons and to curry favor in Beijing, will we tolerate that, or would we prefer an IPEF without such a country and with Taiwan?
I understand the concern there. I think that conversations are ongoing about the process that needs to be put in place in order to determine.
With all due respect, you sound a little bureaucratic. And I'll just point out that what we can't have is trade agreements that don't look at the balance of trade. Every time we increase our deficit, we lose 10,000 jobs. And while business is saying that there is a labor shortage, there isn't enough of a labor shortage to get the enormous increases in real wages that the working class of this country deserves. I yield back.
Thank you. Let me now recognize our Vice Chair of this Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, Representative Radiwagan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Talo Falapa. Thank you to the panel for testifying. I too want to say that I'm a proud member of the Taiwan Caucus. Our Indo-Pacific partners and allies have a tremendous demand for infrastructure construction, and I think we need to compete against China in building infrastructure in the region. And I just want to mention that China has built a huge, fancy international airport in independent Samoa, which is 55 miles away from my home district in American Samoa. But I'd like to ask each of you, how does IPEF provide necessary protections and certainties for U.S. investment in critical infrastructure, particularly when competing against subsidized PRC capital? Mr. Moy? Ambassador Moy?
I can handle that one. Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. So, one of the things that was decided among IPEF partners in November was the launch of an infrastructure investment accelerator in collaboration with the Partnership on Global Infrastructure. And so we're working with the other IPEF partners so that we can, use, pool funding to be able to build more infrastructure more quickly in the Indo-Pacific region, working closely with the more developed economies in IPEF, particularly targeting some of the other Southeast Asian and Pacific Islands partners in IPEF, and then broadening beyond that. And so that's going to be a priority here as we go through this year. We've already done several scoping missions to different IPEF members. But more broadly, we're also using mechanisms like the Quad with India, Japan, and Australia to develop a Quad infrastructure coordination group so that, again, we can work closely with our partners to make sure that we're able to invest and build infrastructure in the region that is high standard, takes into account labor and environmental considerations, and is an alternative to some of the Chinese infrastructure that you've just made reference to.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Oh, sorry.
Did you want to respond?
Just very quickly, Madam Vice Chair, thank you very much for that question. I think on the issue, this is a non-IPEF issue, but the issue of digital infrastructure, I think that we have actually quite a few things to be proud of, including uniting with Australia on a program to help with the digital connectivity. That's worth about $65 million there. We've also combined forces with Japan as well as Australia to help with the East Micronesia undersea cable. This is something where we know that 99% of internet traffic passes through these international undersea cables, and we are happy to see the connection between Micronesia, Kiribati, Nauru in this program. And this shows you how much you can achieve thinking creatively and using our friends out there to help us achieve this. Even though we might not be able to provide the funding, we can look to Japan, we can look to Australia, who are real experts in the Pacific Islands, even more than we are in certain areas. And so we're really pleased that we can do this for Pacific Islands. We got a good story to tell, and there's more to come on that to make sure that those partners in the Pacific Islands who actually prefer the United States get more sort of initiative from us.
Okay. Regaining my time, Das Phan, did you want to add something to it?
The only thing I would add is that as part of IPEF, we did announce something called the Catalytic Capital Fund. That is an effort where we are working together as 4 developed countries with Australia, Japan, and South Korea to commit to a total of US $33 million, specifically for the funding of late-stage project preparation. It is in some of these developing nations where projects are not necessarily seen as bankable, or that there are concerns about risk. And so this type of fund devoted to the late-stage project prep can certainly help catalyze investment into those nations where investors otherwise might be concerned.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yield back.
Thank you. Since we have some time before the votes, we will now entertain second round of questioning, and I will start. I want to go back to APEC conference that we hosted last November. And Ambassador Murray, I want to ask you about, how our United States role as the chair of 2023 APEC and broader participation in APEC fit into our U.S. economic and geopolitical goals in the Indo-Pacific region. And in your assessment, what were the most meaningful outcomes of that 2023 Leaders Summit?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that it was really important for us to host APEC in 2023 as a substantive demonstration to the region of our willingness to lead in an organization that's been around for now 30 years. And it's an organization that many of the economies in the region really, really care about. Partners like Australia and Japan that we get along with very well, but also some of the smaller economies, Papua New Guinea, for example, or some of the economies on this side of the hemisphere in Peru and Chile. So it was really important, I think, as a demonstration of leadership to be able to do that. I think we did a very conscious job of listening very carefully to what our partners wanted to focus on in 2023. And where they were really focused was on issues around sustainability and addressing the climate crisis, on issues of resiliency and addressing challenges with supply chains, and then also on issues of economic inclusion and wanting to make sure that all communities have an opportunity to participate in the region's economy. And so were very careful to craft a agenda around those issues, and we hosted meetings in 5 different cities around the United States, trying to showcase the diversity of the United States. We were not only in San Francisco, but also in Seattle, in Detroit, in Palm Springs, and in Honolulu. And we were very intentional about bringing in underrepresented groups as well, whether Native Hawaiians or Asian Americans or African Americans, Latinos, et cetera, to make sure that people would have a very comprehensive view of our country. And I guess I would just say to close then that by the time we got to San Francisco, I think we were able to deliver some of those policy outcomes. We were able to use APEC as a platform for meetings like the one between the president and Xi Jinping. And we were able to use APEC as a platform to demonstrate regional economic leadership through things like the announcement of IPEF. And so in that, it was very successful.
Thank you. Just briefly, in all of my trips to the region in the Indo-Pacific, we heard some different opinions about how those countries view IPEF. Some view it as a stepping stone for eventual FTA. Some view it as an opportunity to upgrade their standards at the local level. I mean, so what were your, feelings in your engagement with the countries that participated in IPEF? And
so what I heard consistently, and there are 12 partners that are in common with IPEF and APEC, what I heard consistently was a view that we're really glad the United States is actively engaging in the region on economic issues. And so that included IPEF, that included APEC, that included mechanisms like the Quad, and some of the other things that Principal Deputy Secretary Moy noted with Taiwan and Japan and Australia and other engagements that we're doing. So we heard, very much that, excitement about the U.S. being actively engaged in the region. There's always going to be the view that we need to do more and to even be more engaged. And I think all of us at this table share that view that we want to be as engaged as possible. And so, but we heard very positive things from our partners throughout the year about the opportunities that were being presented.
thank you. I will yield and recognize Ranking Member Bera for your questions.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. A lot of discussion about trade, and again, I don't have that time machine that could take us back to 2016 and past TPP, but I do think we should learn. TPP was sold as a trade deal, but truly trade deals are also geopolitical strategic tools to open up markets, to put together mechanisms of conflict resolution, et cetera. We can't go backwards in time, but what we can do, the politics of trade have changed, but we can also look at the positive, and I'll give the Trump administration credit for USMCA, a negotiated trade deal that got close to 400 members of the House of Representatives to vote in the affirmative, more Democrats than Republicans, labor support, et cetera. There's a lot in there. And, as someone who does believe that these types of agreements open up markets, create opportunities to both lift up societies, create stable democracies, et cetera, I would hope that the folks that supported and voted for USMCA would see this as an opportunity to perhaps expand off of that. Fast forward to where we are today, we have IPEF, and I think it is an extremely important tool that we should continue to negotiate and address, because it's easy for us to do a trade deal between New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Korea, the United States. It's absolutely necessary for us to work with the Southeast Asian nations right now. And a deal like IPEF with its various pillars, and each country is not going to be able to meet the high standards that we might want, but using the carrot approach, this is a mechanism where you can get certain countries over time to address labor standards, to address environmental standards, to advance their economies. And I certainly continue to encourage the administration to use every tool available, because we'd rather write the rules as opposed to someone else writing those rules with like-valued allies and others. Something like IPEF, something like an expanded USMCA, bringing in Indo-Pacific nations, when combined with historic legislation that was passed in the last Congress, Secretary Moore, you talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, but when we look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill, when we look at the bipartisan Chips and Science Act, those are American bills. Those are bills that are helping us rebuild industry, bring jobs back in manufacturing, help us build 21st century infrastructure to allow us to compete with the world. But we have to have open markets. We have to have the ability to reduce barriers, so those products that we're developing, those industries that we're rebuilding, we have markets to sell into. And again, I'm an optimist about the future. I'm an optimist if we can come together in a nonpartisan way and think about, rebuilding America at its best in terms of selling to the world with like-minded allies. It's not a given what the future looks like, but I think it is a future if we work together, if we work with our partners like Korea, Japan, Australia, increasingly building off of alliances like the Quad Coalition, which is Australia, United States, Japan, and India. India is a right marketplace for us to help build supply chains in the pharmaceutical sector. So we're not so over-reliant on a single source, which we saw impacted us during the pandemic. I also, in my travels to the region, we're not asking the countries in Southeast Asia to choose the United States or China. What we're saying is, we think we have a better product. We think we offer a better deal. Obviously, you're going to do business with both countries, but if we're competing on a fair playing field, and I think that's what you saw the Trump administration put policies in place, and you've seen the Biden administration continue many of those policies. On a fair playing field, America is going to win, right? I mean, how we do trade, how we do investment, how we resolve conflicts. On a fair playing field, America will win. Right now, it's not always a fair playing field, but again, the prior administration and I think the Biden administrations continued those policies. So I'm optimistic. And I'll yield back.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Representative Barr for more questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to focus a little bit on the climate pillar of the strategy here, because Indo-Pacific countries are in the middle of an energy crisis. Current production levels cannot meet the growing demand for energy in these developing countries, and many countries in the region do not have geographic topology to support green energy sources such as wind, hydro, and solar. And it's true, many of these countries have expressed a desire to work with the United States on transitory energy, such as cleaning current coal sources or natural gas, to meet energy demands while improving their current environmental standards. But that opinion is not uniform. And when we traveled into the Indo-Pacific region and in the ASEAN countries, one of the messages that they delivered to us, I'm talking about government officials, was, look, that's fine. You're pushing us toward a clean, green economy. That's the policy of the Biden administration. But we have energy poverty. Does the Biden administration understand we just need reliable electricity in rural parts of and remote parts of Indonesia, for example? And forcing us to move quickly into a green transition is actually pushing us to the PRC. And so what I'm concerned about is that the Biden administration's climate agenda, especially with respect to announcing restrictions on oil and LNG exports, actually puts these countries in a bind. It gives them no choice but to turn to alternate suppliers of energy such as China. Is that consideration something that you all take seriously?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Congressman. It is a question, an issue that we take very seriously. I think that we, in the administration, have a number of goals. Undersecretary Fernandez probably went through this earlier today, but if we refer to LNG, for example, the temporary pause, or the pause that was announced in January by the administration, was meant to allow the Department of Energy to renew or to review new potential contracts. Doesn't mean that the ones that we have that are already approved will stop. The reason why the Department of Energy should be reviewing these applications for LNG exports to non-FTA countries is we have to look at the comprehensiveness, or we have to give a thorough examination of how this will impact the economy, the environment,
Okay.
and
Reclaiming my time, I guess my question, and to any of you, how does a ban on LNG affect global carbon emissions if Asian countries buy LNG from countries with higher emission profiles than the United States? We're not actually helping the environment here by cutting off our own energy exports, which are the cleanest in the world. And so not only does it compromise our diplomatic efforts to extricate some of these countries from the grips of China, it's actually not advancing your climate goals. And so I just urge the administration to just step back and realize that this war against fossil energy is compromising our diplomatic objectives in many cases. Final question, considering China's dominant market share in solar, wind, and batteries, how would a push toward green energy not decrease, but increase China's coercive leverage over these countries? Any of you?
Sure. I think one of the things that we would definitely want to highlight is the work we're doing collaboratively with economies like Vietnam and Indonesia through Just Energy Transition Partnership and other programming to build capacity and to work with them directly so that, again, we're opening up those commercial lines directly with U.S. companies and U.S. businesses and again, to build that capacity. I think the other thing that's interesting, just to note quickly in the APEC context, is that when we made a turn in 2022 to focusing on sustainability and focusing on clean energy in APEC, that was led by Thailand as a Southeast Asian partner that was making clear that it didn't just want to be working with China, that it wanted to be working with other economies in the region. And so we really tried to build on that in our APEC host year this last year, and continue to have conversations with other partners about renewables.
Well, I think that's fair, and I do think that climate is an issue, and they care about that just like we do. The point here is that when you're dealing with countries with energy scarcity, and we want them to be less dependent on China, we need to give them all the tools. So with that, I yield.
Thank you.
Take that back.
With that, I know we've come to the end of our committee hearing today, but I just want to make some few closing comments. That is to say that we just cannot afford to cede the Indo-Pacific economy to the CCP. Trading with Indo-Pacific countries create more American jobs and grows our economy and strengthens our position and reputation in the region. We agree with that. Trade with allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific is important, not just for America's own standing, but for our competition with CCP. If we are serious about economic statecraft, it requires the U.S. government to open markets in foreign countries, but also address the unfair trade practices in China. But I am disappointed that this administration appears to be re-engaging in a failed commercial dialogue with China instead of using that time and resources to create new economic standards with partners and allies that enhance trade and restrict unfair PRC trade. All to say that we cannot allow the global economy to be beholden to CCP standards, and we cannot allow our allies and partners to lose faith in American economic might because we're not serious about our economic and trade agenda. So I urge my colleagues in Congress and our counterparts in the executive branch to lead in trade policy. And I wish we also had a trade USTR, because every time we talk about this trade pillar of the IPAF, you defer that to USTR. But I really urge the executive branch to lead in that trade policy and to ensure that we are actively pursuing sectoral agreements and digital economy standards, because our success in the strategic competition depends on it. With that, I want to thank our witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for their participation and asking questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those questions in writing. I would like to recognize Mr. Berra for any closing comments you may have.
No, other than in my last statement, I'm optimistic. I think legislation that the Biden-Harris administration, working with Congress in many cases in a bipartisan way, set the framework and foundation for an optimistic future. I agree with the chairwoman that we do have to come up with a positive agenda for the 21st century in terms of movement of goods, services, commerce, dispute resolution, and they need to be modernized for the 21st century, but we should do so working with our partners and allies, like-minded countries like Japan, Korea, Australia and New Zealand and others, and then opening up new markets and creating stability in really dynamic markets like the Southeast Asia. So look forward to working with the Biden-Harris administration to continue to build off of the foundation that's been set in place over the last 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. So without objection, the committee now stands adjourned.